Community Engagement Manager at Post.
And I'm Angela Ariola, Donor Stewardship and Events Manager, and we're really delighted to be here with you to help you get to know Peninsula Open Space Trust, also known as Post.
Great. Hey, Angela, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Mark?
I'm good. I'm excited to do this. We've been presenting so many online webinars about a variety of topics, and we're taking this moment today to kind of give a holistic run through of everything about Post's mission and history in our program areas so that folks could walk away with a really good picture of what we do.
That's awesome. I'm newer to Post, so it's very interesting for me to learn about all the different working areas and how they weave together.
Yeah, and I know that many of our community members are very interested in specific areas of our work, like public access or wildlife. They do all interconnect quite a bit, and I'm happy to share more today. I've been with Post for 6 years now, and I'm happy that I've learned a lot along the way, but there's always more to learn, and so I'm happy to share what I know with you today.
We'll be talking about Post's mission, history, and we'll share a little bit about the different conservation programs. Along the way, we'll pause, discuss, and answer some related questions submitted in advance.
Great. Thanks for joining me today, Angela. And with that, I'm going to start into it, starting with a bit of a native land acknowledgement. So we like to start this way, just mentioning that the lands that Post works on here in the Bay Area, on the peninsula and in the South Bay, have been home to many communities of Native people since time immemorial. And before colonization, there was up to 58 distinct tribal communities here in the area. Today, we recognize the Muwekma Ohlone, the Amamutsun, the Tamiyan Nation, and Ramaytush Ohlone as contemporary Native communities who are in Post working area. So these communities are the past, present, and future caretakers of these lands that we are all very passionate about. And it's important to reflect on the thousands of years history of these communities taking thoughtful care of these landscapes as we together as a community consider how we can all work together to take care of this place into the future. So let's start talking about Peninsula Open Space Trust. Our mission is to protect open space on the peninsula and in the South Bay for the benefit of all. And we think about many different types of benefits, including social, environmental, and economic benefits. At the highest level, we are thinking about protecting our clean air and water, but we're also thinking about providing public access to beautiful natural places, protecting our wildlife, stewarding our local farmlands, and many other issues. I want to mention here that we are an accredited land trust. This is part of a National Land Trust Accreditation Commission. And essentially what that means is that we're held to the highest possible standard in regards to how we operate with our land transactions and managing donor funds so that donors and property owners and other partners can have trust in how we're working. So this map here shows you a little bit of context and history of our work. We have worked in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and northern Santa Cruz counties since 1977. That's when we were founded. And to date, we've protected over 80,000 acres of land that are now part of our public open spaces. Some of it continues to be farmland or working Redwood Forests, and many different types of land all throughout Redwood Forest, baylands, lands in the Santa Clara Valley. And this is in great part thanks to our incredible donor community that we want to thank along the way in this presentation. So who are we? In addition to our board of directors, we have about 50 people on staff working on everything from marketing to fundraising to land transactions, property management and caring for land, and many other functions. We also have this wonderful large community of donors and volunteers who are supporting this work. Many of you are watching today. We want to say thank you to all of you. Again, absolutely because of you that this work is possible, and that's been since the beginning of our history. And in addition to that, we consider everybody who's connecting with open spaces and attending post events and those of our partners and cares about local land and nature, engaging with local opportunities to support open space as part of our community as well. We have this incredibly diverse community of people here, and we all care so much about nature, and it's really inspiring the work that we're doing all together. So to expand a little bit on our philosophy and our strategy in our work, we are thinking about the business of forever. Here's a picture showing the Santa Clara Valley floor with all of our development. And as we continue to grow as a region, we are thinking quite a bit about, as I said, protecting our clean air and water and the ecosystems and wildlife that sustain this clean air and water. And as we think about climate change, this becomes even more important. So we're trying to steward a careful balance of urban and rural lands to continue to make our region extraordinary for future generations. And lastly, I'll say that throughout all the areas of our work, we're thinking a lot about equity and equity for all of our communities and trying to integrate frameworks around that throughout these areas. So how do we work? It really boils down in many cases to land transactions. This has been our strength since our founding. And in that whole category of work, we're summarizing that here very briefly because it's very complex and very particular to each situation. But in general, we work to identify and prioritize properties that we could protect through acquisition or conservation easements. And I'll share a little bit more about how we identify properties in a moment here. Then we go out and protect these properties either by acquiring the land or protecting them through what's called a conservation easement. It essentially limits the types of uses and development that occur on a property. And in our case, we are generally often looking to partner and transfer these lands to the appropriate agency or partner for long-term permanent management. And we're going to share more about these different examples, but we have 40 years of success behind us, including places like Windy Hill, Bear Island, the farm and ranch lands in the Pescadero area and elsewhere on the San Mateo coast, and many others. So many distinct examples of this work that you might be familiar with. Our work is at a landscape level, so we're really thinking holistically across the entire area that we're working in, focused on connectivity in the sense of connectivity between our existing protected parks, but also connectivity for wildlife, and prioritizing values such as protecting our redwood forest, our farmland, our watershed. We try to integrate these different values into a framework we've developed called our Conservation Prioritization Framework. And that is a way of accounting for the different values that each land opportunity might have and weighing them against one another so that we could decide on the priority opportunities that we could pursue each year. So after protecting land, there's a huge amount of work that goes on in caring for and stewarding these lands. And this includes activities like removing invasive plants and revegetating areas, such as in the lower left, you see planting willow stakes in a Riparian Creek area. We do a lot of creek restoration. In the middle, bottom, you're seeing some construction going on with volunteers and paid contractors to build new infrastructure at a farm. And on the right, an example of monitoring and ongoing research to understand, what is the impacts and opportunities to conduct more stewardship and what management needs to be done on any given property. This quick video gives you a great example of stewardship. One big category is erosion control. In many cases, there's a lot of erosion in various areas of the Bay Area. So many cases we're coming in, hiring contractors to repair erosion damage, to protect our creeks, and otherwise restore the area. And so next, I want to talk about partnerships. So I didn't mention this earlier, but we are a 501c3 nonprofit land trust. So we're a private organization, and we work with all of the agencies that you see on your screen here, are public government agencies that run our public parks. So in many, many cases, Post goes out, acquires property, transfers it to these public agencies to operate as publicly accessible parks and preserves. So we work in really close tandem. We were actually founded to support these public agencies, and this work continues into the future. Many examples all across the peninsula and the South Bay. I do want to mention other partners, including farmers, sustainable foresters, researchers, and many other environmental nonprofits and public agencies. It's truly an ecosystem of partners that we work with, and we are all critical to each other's success. So I'm going to stop there in terms of a general overview before we launch into a discussion of our various program areas.
This is all really helpful to hear, and I'm reflecting on some of the practical reasons of why we do this work. Clean air, clean water, quality of life. I think this is a good stopping point for us to ask a couple of questions from you, our viewers. Here's one that I hear frequently asked. What's the difference between Post as a private agency and a public agency partner that runs and or manages parks?
Wonderful. Awesome, Angela. Thank you for asking that. And this is the number one question we want answered today for everybody. So we were constantly confused with our public agency partners. And it's hard for the general community because there's so many different organizations doing different parts of this work. So again, we're a private 501c3 nonprofit. We were actually founded shortly after Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. So that is a public government agency. They have elected officials that serve on a board, and they're taxpayer funded. And so they were founded in the early 70s. Several years after their founding, some of the same folks decided that there should be a private nonprofit partner, and that's when Post was founded to support this public agency in acquiring new lands and protecting them. So that is our strength, is to work as a private entity to raise money and acquire land for conservation. And then we transfer these lands often to these public agencies. So we don't run any of the parks that are open to you. There's a good chance anywhere on the west side of the valley, on the peninsula or in the South Bay, that we might have been involved in some of these parks. But it's our public agency partners like Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, Santa Clara County and San Mateo County parks, state parks, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. I'm like smiling as I go through this list because it's hard to get through all of them. So they're the ones managing these parks, and we're set up to support them in addition to some other goals.
Yeah, there's a lot of partners, and it's like we're all doing the same work. So I can see how it's we're easily confused with others.
Yep.
Here is another question. For newly acquired land, what is the process for deciding how best to manage land and which agency to work with or transfer land to?
Yeah, that is a great question as well. So oftentimes as we're considering the various opportunities that are coming at us, there are oftentimes a logical takeout partner or a logical partner that we think of from the beginning. So say there is a property that's adjacent to an existing public open space. Perhaps that agency that runs that open space will be a logical partner to work with on this particular property. It becomes a little bit more complicated sometimes when we're talking about areas where there isn't a logical takeout partner, or maybe in the case of farmland, what do we do there? So essentially the short answer is sometimes it's a very logical decision, and sometimes it takes years to kind of collaborate with other organizations and figure out the most logical and best use of that property, and what needs to be done to properly steward that property and maximize the benefit to the community.
Right, that makes complete sense. Great. One other question. Why do public agencies seem to need so much help?
Yeah, and so much help in regards to acquiring land. I think that's the main, the classic example of how we help. What I've learned in my time at Post is that generally it can be difficult sometimes for public agencies to act on land protection opportunity that comes up. Perhaps there's urgency or a timeline that is quick that needs to be followed for a particular transaction. Perhaps a property owner wants to move quickly, and perhaps they want to work confidentially. So that's Post's main strength as a private entity, that we could work quickly and act confidentially with willing sellers. So there's many other reasons that public agencies need help, and we should all be thinking about how we could support our public agencies, but that's the answer I'll give to that one, just in relation to Post.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. We have less boundaries in order to allow us to act quickly and effectively to support our agency partners. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Yeah.
Okay, well, with that, let's move on to discussing our program areas, starting with public access. Great. So I love this picture. It's some kids out at what I think is Windy Hill. And I think most people understand this goal, which is to protect land for the sake of everybody being able to go out and enjoy these lands. And there are many different reasons that folks go out to our local parks. I'll describe them in a second here, but I want to pause on this image, which shows some of our protected lands and some of the names of the publicly accessible open spaces and preserves and parks that you might be familiar with. And then all the orange dots on the map are there to designate Post projects, either lands that we've acquired for protection, or stewardship projects that we've engaged in with partners, or conservation easements that we've secured. So you could start to see that many of these projects are now, within the boundaries of publicly accessible open spaces that you might be already enjoying. So folks go out to these places for many reasons: to hike and to walk, to do more kind of involved activities like mountain biking or riding horses, but also on a basic level to go out and picnic with your family, hang out in the woods at a picnic table, enjoy some food, and just connect on a basic level like that. I love that too. There's folks who love fishing on the coast or in local lakes or on the bayside. Many different types of uses, and we want to honor and create space for these different types of ways of interacting with the natural world. We have such a diverse community and many diverse ways that people want to connect with nature. So as part of our public access program, we're really trying to consider that and support all of that. So I want to share a few examples just really quickly to illustrate this point of places that you might already be visiting that Post was involved in. So Mindigo Hill, part of Russian Ridge Open Space Preserve, in 2007, with the help of 1,300 donors, we raised the money to protect over 1,000 acres there at Mindigo Hill. We then transferred it to Mid-Penn in 2008. And after cleanup and construction and some planning, Mindigo Gateway was open to the public in March 2016. Here's a great sunset picture of Rancho San Vicente. This is an addition to Calero County Park. Very similar story. In 1998, this property consisted of 966 acres, privately owned by a Monterey developer. And there were multiple failed development plans there for various policy and planning reasons. So at the point of June 2009, we were able to purchase this property in a partnership with Santa Clara County Parks. This was then transferred to County Parks and has been open to the public since 2018. Here's a picture of Bear Island. This is just south of Foster City. In 1997, Post was able to step in. Again, same story with the support of many, many, many donors. We were able to protect 1,600 acres and transfer this to the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge. And next, I'd like to show this image of Pigeon Point Lighthouse on the San Mateo coast. Post has worked since the 2000s to protect a variety of lands on the coast as part of our Saving the Endangered Coast campaign. We've been very successful in protecting many lands on the San Mateo coast. That's why you enjoy such a beautiful view along the coast, as well as for other reasons like the great work of the California Coastal Commission and decades of advocacy. But we've been very successful in land acquisition and protection along the coast. And I want to share another coastal example here is Tunis Creek Beach. We worked with our donors to protect 58 acres of Tunis Creek Beach in 2017. We subsequently transferred it to San Mateo County Parks, which has been engaged in a long community input process to plan restoration and new amenities so that a diversity of people can access this new public beach. So very classic example, Post acquires land, transfers, partners on the planning so that an area can be open for public access. So speaking a little bit more holistically now about overall our strategy with public access, we are thinking about supporting these regional trail network projects, including the Bay Area Ridge Trail, great partners, as well as developing the California Coastal Trail, the San Mateo County portion of that, and other trail networks in the region. One newer effort that we've undertaken in recent years is this effort to create a bay to sea trail connection from the East Palo Alto area all the way to the coast. And great progress on this project. Many local cities and agencies are part of this effort. We're expecting it to take a long time, many years to complete, but we've embarked on this sort of visionary project with the community that we are looking forward to making progress on in future years. So let's stop there. There's a lot to discuss in this whole area, but we're just gonna pause for some questions now.
I really love how Post protects lands of different types. They're not all redwoods, they're not all beaches, they're not all grasslands. One of the favorite trails of both myself and my family is the Calpurisma Trail. It gives a lot. It's a little property, but it gives a lot. It's right off of Highway 1 in Half Moon Bay. You have breathtaking views of the ocean. You can see bulls and other cattle right up close, right as you pass the cow ranch. And you can ride your bikes down the trail itself, which I think is kind of awesome. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely one to see.
Yeah, I love that spot too, Angela. I'm a South Bay person, so I mentioned Rancho San Vicente and Calero County Park. I gravitate towards the south end of Post area. I love all those places in the South Bay, but I love the Caliprisma Trail too. It's so family friendly and nice and flat, and you get such awesome views of the ocean out there also. So yeah, I'd love to hear in chat, what everybody's favorite spots are too. But let's take some questions here.
Yeah. Here's a question. What are some of the factors that go into opening land to the public?
Yeah, that is a great question from our audience. So uh, oftentimes I've heard as community engagement manager, oh, so-and-so property, I know it's been protected. When is it going to be open to the public? And it's true, it might take several years sometimes to open a property up for public use. And there's a lot of detail there. But generally, the reason is there's a lot of thoughtful planning going on to make sure that when that property is open, we have protected natural resources. We've ensured that that property is safe for the public. And we've reconciled all these different types of uses that people want to have between dog access, biking, equestrians, walking, picnicking, other uses. So pretty long involved process there sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know in some cases, just some of the stewardship and restoration activities that might occur is perhaps erosion control. Perhaps we buy a property and, there are some existing roads or trails there, but there's erosion. And so there needs to be erosion repair and control to prevent further damage and also to create a safe kind of environment for the public. Sometimes habitat restoration or research to understand, say we put public access in this area, we allow people to access this area. Are we impacting any endangered species or other sensitive species? So really impressed with the people who do that work. And, it's hard to wait, but it's usually worth the wait.
Yeah, you said that. It's definitely hard to wait, but it sounds like there's so much that go into it that it's definitely, like you said, worth it. Here's another question. Does the public have the ability to provide input on what's planned for these public lands?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, the answer is yes. So this is another kind of distinction between Post and our public agency partners is that oftentimes at the point where serious planning for public access begins to occur, it's generally our public agency partner that's going to operate that park that is going to be the lead on that planning process. And that often includes a community input process. So just for example, Tunis Creek Beach, there has been an extensive community input process to figure out what types of uses do people want to have at Tunis Creek Beach. And Post has supported and collaborated on that effort. There's other examples throughout the peninsula and the South Bay. So there are definitely opportunities to engage. It takes some effort on our part as citizens to follow our public agencies where we live and listen, read newsletters, check the website, check social media for when those opportunities come up. But we definitely do have a chance to give our input.
Great. There's a lot that goes into that. It sounds like there's lots of opportunity for people to give input at different stages of the planning process. So with that, let's move on.
All right, great. So next area that I'd like to talk about is wildlife and the work that we do to protect wildlife habitat and wildlife linkages across the area. And we'll be talking a little bit about this special area called Coyote Valley along the way. But first, I want to set a little bit of context by showing you this map. So this map is just the topography of our region and the peninsula and the South Bay on the left of the screen. Then there's the Santa Clara Valley in the middle, and to the right you see the Diablo Range. And this is, you could consider it the natural environment of the Bay Area. Again, honoring the native people who have lived here for 10,000 years. And they stewarded these lands very thoughtfully in that time, managing for wildlife habitat and stewarding the biodiversity of the area. And then through colonization, first the Spanish and then Americans, and coming into the 1900s and all the development that we've seen, we're now in this state where in the gray you see urbanized lands, and in orange you see agricultural lands. And so there's been a huge amount of development in our region, and you could start to see how this landscape has become increasingly fragmented for wildlife. And when you impose roads on this map, it becomes even more fragmented. So we have these major roads just cutting up these different habitat areas for wildlife and creating barriers for them. So in dark green here, you're looking at all protected lands in our region. So we have done a good job of protecting a lot of natural lands, but there is still the task of connecting them to one another, as well as restoring these lands. So we have a dedicated program around wildlife habitat and linkages, and we're thinking about all sorts of animals and wildlife, including the largest and most charismatic, like mountain lions, also known as pumas, and cougars, but also the smallest, like the California newt. So there's a whole range of animals and also plant life that we need to plan around in regards to habitat and wildlife. And so I'm going to share pretty concisely about this project, this work. And I want to just illustrate, on the most micro level, or the most kind of specific projects, we're working on habitat restoration for specific threatened habitats. So one great example of that is the ponds and wetlands and the various vernal pools that we have throughout our region. So think about an individual pond as being an ecosystem. So we might think about a specific pond on a property. And on the San Mateo coast, we have many of these ponds. And two of the species that we think about associated with these ponds are the San Francisco garter snake and the red-legged frog. So we might do research and restoration activities on one specific pond to make that whole pond habitat better for these endangered and threatened animals. But on a broader scale, we are thinking about connectivity for all animals and wildlife throughout the entire region. And we do this work in various areas. Highway 17 is one example, but I want to focus a little bit on this special area called Coyote Valley, which you can see highlighted in darker yellow on the right-hand side of your map, of this map here. And we've identified this area as a critical linkage for all wildlife between the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Diablo Range. So in partnership with other organizations, conservation organizations, public agencies, the city of San Jose, many groups, we have been working hard to protect Coyote Valley and enhance it as a wildlife corridor. And how are we doing that? Oftentimes it's through research. This image is from a camera trap, and we're working with some great biologists, including the great organization Pathways for Wildlife, to conduct a variety of studies along all the major roads and freeways throughout our region, including in Coyote Valley. So here we have a coyote moving through a culvert. It's a drainage culvert under one of our major roads. And we have many, many images of wildlife moving across the landscape at these critical crossings. Some incredible images we've captured over the years. And this is probably the most incredible image of a badger hanging out at one such culvert. And you can see those eyes coming down the trail. That is a coyote. So this badger and coyote were hanging out in close proximity. Many researchers have known that coyotes and badgers might sometimes hunt together. Some folks think that's incidental. It is not planned. They just show up in the same place looking for ground squirrels and they start working together. But this was an incredible image captured by Pathways for Wildlife in their wildlife connectivity research that they were doing in partnership with Post. And so here you could see the coyote actually kind of looking over to the badger and getting ready to try to get the badger to move with him through this culvert under one of our roads. And there the badger goes and is following the coyote, almost like, all right, buddy, I'm going to follow you and we're going to go hunting together. So that was an incredible image that we captured. The things that play out under our roads, right? It's wild. To describe another study, we did a bobcat collaring study in partnership with Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, Pathways for Wildlife, and other partners in the Coyote Valley region. And through this research, we were able to track coyotes and their bobcats and their movements through that area. And we could actually identify where there might be barriers to their movement. So you could see this bobcat has a distinct range. And essentially, it approaches a certain road towards the top of your screen, but then stops. And that is Monterey Road in Coyote Valley. And that has been identified as a very serious barrier to wildlife movement. So now through our research, we know this road is an impediment to wildlife, and we are working to sort out how we address that. Pretty cool. So much more to share about our wildlife, habitat, and connectivity work, but I'm going to leave you with this image of Coyote Valley, one of our, as I said, critical areas that we're focusing on, and we're very much looking forward to a future, thanks to our donors, thanks to the support of the community, and all the work that our public agency partners are doing, where this wildlife corridor is protected, where there are opportunities for public recreation, and where, we're also protecting our clean air and water and our farmland and many other values too. So let's stop there and discuss a little bit.
I'm really glad to see how, as a community, we're taking a more holistic approach to the planning process. I think Coyote Valley is a really good example of that. It seems that there used to be a very limited understanding about how our impacts are and how our planning is making an impact on the wildlife around us. What do you believe is the key component that changed our thinking?
That's a big question. I'm impressed with whoever submitted that question, because it's kind of philosophical in a way. But I'm reflecting on the history of the area. I wanted to emphasize that there have been cultures of people here, the Native American people and indigenous communities that have lived here for over 10,000 years. And, when Europeans arrived here, they noted, the incredible diversity and richness of the life here. And so there was planning going on, very complex planning to take good care of this place. And so in the past 150, 200 years, we've prioritized agriculture at first, and in the past 50 to 100 years, we've prioritized urbanization. And there's just been different values that we've had in terms of the use of our land. And at times perhaps not the most holistic thinking about the impacts on our water, the impacts on our air, and the wildlife. So, of course, we know now that at times we did not account for the full impact of our planning decisions. And it's pretty cool how in many areas across this whole region, San Mateo County and Santa Clara County, the communities coming together saying, we have values around habitat conservation in addition to other goals that we have as a community, and we want to do the best job that we can in planning. And Coyote Valley is a wonderful example of that, where the thinking in the past decade has really evolved to where we see the natural infrastructure benefits of that place, and the various values other than development, in this case, that we can account for. So, I have some hope for the future that we're going to keep doing a better and better job.
Yeah. Well, I know we will do a better job with support of our community. And as you mentioned earlier, we're honestly seeing the changes in how our impacts affect more than just us, and affect us honestly in ways that we didn't even know they were affecting us. So it's important, and I think that we're on the right track. So let's keep going.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Angela. It's important to reflect on that.
Yeah, definitely. Here's another question. So you had that Coyote Badger video that was up. And so when you're driving through different areas of the Bay Area, where would this type of activity take place?
Yeah, that's a great thing to reflect on. I mean, the quick answer is kind of everywhere. I mean, we don't have any idea the lives of animals that are playing out under our feet as we're driving Highway 17 and 101 and many of the other roads around here.
We don't have cameras absolutely everywhere, just capturing all this beautiful wildlife footage.
Yeah, I mean, there's been very extensive studies, especially on Highway 17 and in the South Bay on 101, some other areas too. So the really great documentation that we've done with partners in those areas. But yeah, this wildlife is everywhere. I could say that particular imagery was from the South Bay. One thing to emphasize is we try to be careful about what types of information we share about particular wildlife sometimes when they're sensitive habitats or sensitive species. For example, SF garter snakes and red-legged frogs, they exist on post-protected properties, but we might not be naming specific locations so that we don't encourage, the general public to impact those areas.
Right.
And yeah, as with all the other areas of work that we've been discussing so far, we have to emphasize that there's a whole world of additional work with wildlife habitat and connectivity issues that we're doing that we didn't get to today. But this gives you kind of an idea of the major themes.
Right. Well, yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for pointing that out. The fact that we are protecting the wildlife not only by the work that we do, but also by not sharing all the details of the locations of these wildlife and the different species. It's just important that we protect them in a variety of ways.
Yep. Great. Okay, so let's move on to redwoods and talking a little bit about our redwood program. I want to start with this map. This map is showing all redwood forest areas in the San Mateo and Santa Clara and Santa Cruz County regions. So all of it is highlighted. Dark green is protected redwood forest. Orange includes areas that post-protected. And we have been working for a long time on this issue of redwood forest protection. We're doing this in partnership with many organizations, diversity of organizations, including other nonprofit land trusts, CAL FIRE, sustainable forestry organizations, And years ago, we began a campaign called the Heart of the Redwoods campaign, where we sought to raise $50 million to protect 20,000 acres. And we're well on our way towards that goal. And why are we protecting redwood forests? Does it even need to be said? Might as well just touch on that. Well, they're critical for our clean air in the region. They're critical for our watersheds and protecting our water supply, but they also play a role in our climate resilience in regards to sequestering carbon. They're incredible trees that withstand fire, drought, and disease, and a very special ecosystem that deserves special attention. So, how are we taking care of the forests? As you probably know, our forests were clear cut historically. Now they've grown back much more densely. And now, with this density of trees that is no longer resembling the historical density, we have a situation where there's too many trees growing too close together, negatively impacting one another and leading to potential issues with drought and disease, and making these forests susceptible to fire. So one of the things that we do is work with sustainable foresters to figure out how we could thin these forests, to remove some of the smaller trees, to allow the big trees to grow even bigger, to allow light to hit the forest floor, and generally improve the ecosystem. So I've played this a few times. This is a cool time lapse of some foresters removing some trees. It's kind of like a haircut, and it's really a healthy practice for the forest. It seems a little bit counterintuitive to some, but the forest does need to be maintained in order to be healthy. And so this is one of the big areas that we focus on. I'm going to show you this map highlighting the CZU Lightning Complex fire from 2020 with this red outline. And one of the major areas of our work is San Vicente Redwoods, highlighted with that circle in the center of your map. This is almost a 9,000 acre property that we've protected. And a lot of our work focuses on this area. And sadly, this entire area burned during the fire. Huge impacts to our human communities, but also impacts to our ecosystems as well that we're working to address. And as I mentioned with that video, some of the selective tree thinning is very helpful in mitigating fire. We also use a variety of other fire mitigation techniques, including prescribed burns and clearing what's called shaded fuel breaks. And I want to focus on prescribed burning for a moment. Again, acknowledging the indigenous stewards of this land that have been here for thousands upon thousands of years. Fire has been a critical component of their land management throughout those millennia. And we recognize now that fire is a critical component of our landscape, and our relationship to fire needs to be restored. So we've had the honor of partnering with the Amamutsun Land Trust and CAL FIRE to conduct some controlled burning in San Vicente Redwoods. And here's an image of what that looks like, is professionals setting some of the debris on the ground on fire and monitoring to ensure that the fire does not get out of control. This is very beneficial to reducing fuel, clearing out debris, allowing more light to hit the ground of the forest, encouraging new plants to grow. And there have been really good impacts of restoring this good fire to the landscape. And it takes a lot of work, but there are examples throughout California of where prescribed burning has been helpful. And here is one such example from the San Vicente Redwoods area, showing an area where there was a prescribed burn prior to the fire in August of 2020. And this area is highlighted with these yellow arrows. And that area, the fire passed through, but did not kill all the trees. Whereas in other areas where there was no prescribed burning, some of the trees were completely killed. All vegetation was killed. It was a very mixed impact across the entire area, but in some of the areas where prescribed burns were conducted, there was quite a bit of positive sign that the prescribed burn really did its job of protecting the forest from catastrophic fire. So this is a huge area of work. Again, we want to acknowledge all of our partners in this work. This is truly a huge regional effort with lots of regional coordination amongst the various public agencies, land trusts, CAL FIRE, indigenous community, and many other partners. And we have a big task ahead of us as a community, but we look forward to a future where we're taking really good care of our redwood forests. We'll stop there.
I have to say, even seeing the fires and, remembering how the smoke filled the air and we had the wildfires, the burning just seems very concerning to me. I know that you're saying that it helps, but is that really what we want?
Yeah, Angela, I agree. It's so counterintuitive. This has taken a few years for me, even working at a land trust and in conservation, to wrap my head around that, fire can be good, especially as we're faced with these entirely too large and out of control fires everywhere, even going on now. Um, it's counterintuitive when you think about the loss of human life and impacts to human communities that we're having now. Reorienting ourselves towards fire, that's something that everybody in the West really needs to grapple with. And we have 100 years of kind of socialization with Smokey the Bear and with, trying to suppress all fire. Now we have to reorient and be like, how do we bring back this healthy type of fire onto the landscape? And it's quite a challenge too, because we have suppressed fire for so long. There is such high density, so much down wood, so much fuel that it's really challenging to bring back some of these forests to like a healthier state.
Right. I think that's what it is. It's a lot of unlearning that I have to do. From a little kid, Smokey the Bear commercials, buttons, when you go to different camps, they remind you constantly. And I know that was for safety in general, so we just didn't have like a large, wildfire to occur. But it's still, I think that's what's so deeply ingrained in me is no fires in forests, period.
Right. Yeah. And a little bit of history that I've learned is that, as we said, the indigenous communities that lived here burned very regularly. For some areas, it was, every 3 to 5 years. Sometimes it was on a longer cycle. But imagine what that does. It makes sure that there's not a fuel buildup. And when the Spanish arrived, that was the first time that they began to sort of outlaw the use of fire by indigenous communities. And then it became even more severe when California, became part of the United States. And all across the West, we had this fire suppression policy where indigenous communities told us along the way, we need fire. Otherwise, there's going to be issues. And so here we are. So we have to figure it out as a community now.
Right. Here's another question for you from one of our viewers. With both controlled burns and selective thinning available for forest management, how is the treatment of an area determined, and how often does the management of forests need to be handled in this way?
That's a very thoughtful question. And not being a forestry expert myself, what I want to focus on in answering that question is just telling a little bit, describing some of the incredible people who work on this. So we want to share a link to a blog we did with this incredible forester named Nadia Hamey. And she's a forester that we work with at San Vicente Redwoods. And many people have had the privilege to read this blog or hear from her or do a tour with her. Um, and essentially, she's dedicated her life to learning about forestry, learning the biology, and many different topics around forest management. And so, what I'll say is that it's very complex and very thoughtful, the process that they go through in terms of looking at a specific area of the forest, considering these various factors. And after considering all that, choosing very specifically the trees that should be cut, and where it is safe to conduct a controlled burn in partnership with CAL FIRE and Indigenous community and other partners. So it really comes down to acre by acre, very thoughtful, specific management, because it's very complex. It has to do with the topography and weather conditions and past management of that area, the species that live there, all sorts of things. So, yeah, that's what I'll say about it. Is it's a very complex, thoughtful management that's going on.
Got it. There is another question here for you, not me. So after the CVU fire, what were some of the first actions that posts took to respond? And did we immediately start planting trees? And what did that look like?
That's an awesome question. A little bit easier than the selective tree thinning one. So I could answer that. As I understand it, some of our teammates that we work with, who are project managers for San Vicente, in describing what needed to be done after the fire, one of the key themes was just waiting to see what the impacts were. So that was one theme, but there were some immediate actions that needed to be taken, mainly around erosion control. There was a big worry about erosion and mudslides and impacts to roads. So teams were out there pretty quickly doing road repair and erosion control activities to just stabilize areas that were at risk when the rains came in the winter. And like I said, there was some waiting that was done to see what areas resprouted, what trees were alive, and what trees were able to resprout. And that waiting game continues. We won't fully realize the impacts of the forest fire for years, perhaps. So there are research efforts underway to kind of understand over time, a year later, 2 years later, what's going on, how does that define further action. We want to be thoughtful. But there are some areas where we've already identified opportunity to go in and do tree plantings and other restoration activities. So it's kind of a mixed bag across that whole area, very complex. As I said, different intensities of fire, many different situations. And the team that's working on that and all the partners, they're very impressive people that are very invested in, doing a good job for future generations, because the forest doesn't grow in just a few years. It's a 50 to 100-year project or more, so it really humbles you, thinking about that long-term work that needs to be done.
Yeah, so just quickly, you mentioned also going back and replanting trees. And I was just thinking, well, if we're thinning in some areas and we're planting in some other areas, what will be the difference there? But it sounds like some of these areas are completely cleared of their trees, and that's where we're going in to plant again. Is that right?
I think that's pretty good characterization. I don't want to speak too specifically to that, as not a person working directly on that. I hope that as time goes on, we're able to present more updates about the progress in the forest. But yeah, that's essentially the way I understand it, is that we've identified areas where there's a higher opportunity to do some restoration activity, and we went out and acted on those, including tree planting. So I'll be looking like everybody else to, hear updates, very, very complex topic.
Thanks, Mark.
Great. Tried my best with that whole area, as it's, a really, really complex one, but I'm going to move on now to farmland and farmland conservation, and the goal of preserving our rich agricultural heritage. So again, a little bit of context for you. We have focused on farmland protection on the San Mateo coast for a long time now as well. And this map is showing you some of our successes in farmland protection. So the orange areas on the map designate areas of farming such as row crop agriculture. And in brown, you're seeing ranching and grazing areas. So that's another form of agriculture, is ranching and grazing. So some of our values around farmland protection include making sure that farmers of diverse backgrounds can stay on the land through a variety of tools, balancing conservation and agriculture, and developing infrastructure to sustain farming long term. And with all the areas of our work, there's that human element, but perhaps even more so with farming. So we work with farmers, and there are all sorts of farmers, including multi-generational farming families like the Leah family, growing Brussels sprouts and other crops that have been on the coast for many generations. Jose Ramirez is a wonderful example of a man who immigrated to the United States, worked on other folks' farms for many years, and through partnership with Post is now operating his own farm on some post-protected land. And there are all sorts of farmers, and Dee Dee Boys is an example of what you would say no longer is a beginning farmer by any means. She's a very experienced farmer now. But there are, folks who are a new generation of farmers beginning their own farm businesses and trying to secure tenure on properties. And so, Dee Dee is an example of a farmer that's achieved some good success working on a farm property, raising poultry, pigs, and other livestock in a really humane way. So all sorts of wonderful people working on farmland. I want to show you this picture of a barn. And this barn illustrates a very important aspect of our farmland work, which is infrastructure development. And why is infrastructure so important? Well, in order for any farming operation to be successful, they need certain types of infrastructure, like outbuildings, barns, fencing, irrigation, all sorts of infrastructure in order to be able to operate a farm. So this has become a focus of our farmland work, is improving and developing infrastructure so that any farmer working on a post-protected property into the future will have the tools they need to be successful. So this barn is one of the many beautiful barns that we've been able to construct out on the San Mateo coast. And it's just one example of infrastructure that we've developed. Thinking further about infrastructure, we have to think about not only the farm operators, but the farm workers who are working on all the farms in the San Mateo coast area and further afield. And so another form of infrastructure that we understand to be critical is farm labor housing. So if we want to have agriculture in the area, we have to think about the cost of living and the housing market in the region and providing safe, good homes for the people who are working on our farms. So we've had some success recently in partnership with the County of San Mateo in developing farm labor housing as well. So I'm going to breeze through this kind of quickly because we've occupied a lot of your time today. But to describe our farmland program quickly for you, I'm going to focus on this example of San Gregorio Farm off of 84. This farm is balancing conservation and agriculture, providing housing for farm workers, many different values all in one place. And it's best illustrated through this map here, kind of showing some of the very thoughtful planning that has gone into balancing these different goals in one property. So first overlay that I'm adding is this green area, and that's the Riparian Creek area running alongside this farm. And along with that, we've set a riparian buffer zone. So in regards to post planning for this property, we wanted to protect the creek and the habitat that the creek provides. So we've ensured that this whole area along the creek is protected, that farm activities are not occurring in that area, so that we protect the habitat for the fish and other wildlife that live in the creek. And next, we've designated a whole area for agricultural use, ensuring that this whole area is protected for farming in perpetuity. So you could drive down 84 and expect to see a farm in this area into future generations. So pretty cool. This is an example of how we use conservation easements. And part of an easement for a farm might include a building envelope, an area where farm infrastructure can be developed, such as a barn, such as farm labor housing, packing shed, a farm stand, other critical infrastructure that farms need. So some development is necessary in order to ensure that farms can be successful operations. So we've set aside this area where the farm center is located, where various infrastructures has been developed. And another piece of critical infrastructure is this pond here. This is a reservoir holding excess water from the creek that's collected in the winter time when there's higher flow, and then stored for use in the summer. So this is a strategy to ensure adequate water supply for the farm, to make sure that the farm can be successful, but it's also a strategy around conservation values and protecting the creek, especially during the summer, and making sure there's not too much of a demand on the creek in the summer when it's really threatened in terms of the habitat for fish. So this is a great example of how we've pulled together various issues on one property, a great success. And you could go visit, Blue House Farm is operating here, and you could visit their farm stand on many weekends. We encourage you to do so. And we want to just reiterate, why is farming important, is because this is a way that we all connect with nature, and it's an opportunity for future generations to continue to enjoy local, healthy, sustainable food. So I'll stop there. That was a little bit more brief. And as you can imagine, there's a whole world of additional work in farmland protection and the many farms we've worked with and the many different examples. But we wanted to breeze through that a little bit quick for you, as we're coming to the end of our presentation.
Right. And that actually reminded me of a story from one of our blogs from 2020 called Meet Jose Ramirez and Go Visit His Farm. It highlights a farmer named Jose, which is highlighted earlier. And he has a passion and a drive that really struck a chord with me. I love his vision and determination. So that's awesome. Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing.
Yeah, I love that story too. And, as the son of immigrants, I really resonate with that one in particular, but of a man coming to this country and being able to establish his own business, and now having the security of knowing he will be able to stay on this property long term, and the types of investments that he can now make because he has that security in regards to long-term crops and other infrastructure. And that's one of the themes of our farmland work is helping farmers to achieve what's called tenure, which is secure kind of establishment on specific properties. That's sometimes difficult to achieve when you don't own your property or you're working towards owning your own property, which is one of the other things that we try to enable.
Yeah, yeah. For the audience, I think it's important to talk a little bit more about the benefits of maintaining land for farmers along public access and habitat conservation. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Angela, because oftentimes we see there being kind of a conflict between different types of uses. And a theme throughout our work at Post is trying to reconcile or synergize or integrate between these different goals. Um, I mentioned we talked about the Calaparisma Trail earlier. That's a great example of how farming is occurring right along that trail, and we've figured out how to get public access there for people to be able to take walks along the coast. So that's an example of how we integrated public access and agriculture. Another great example of public access and agriculture is ranching
Mm-hmm.
and the role that ranching plays in many of our publicly accessible open spaces. Many of the places you might hike through, there's active ranching going on there. And oftentimes that's compatible with public access and it's compatible with conservation because we need grazing in some areas to control the non-native grasses that grow on our landscape. And like I said, in the case of Blue House Farm, there on Highway 84, we are balancing conservation of the creek with agriculture. So in many cases, you can reconcile these things. And farming is important for many reasons. For climate change, we want to have local food into the future in regards to security for our region. It plays a role in carbon sequestration in some cases. It's compatible with protecting our water by preserving farmland. Sometimes we are, ensuring that land continues to recharge our groundwater versus development, and maybe helping to control flooding in some cases. There's many, many different reasons that agriculture is compatible with some of these various values that we have. And so, it's our job to figure out how to make everything work, and balance all these things.
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing all about Post. It's been very helpful for me, and I hope it has been for our viewers too. This brings us to the end of our presentation. And of course, there's so much more to learn, but I'm thinking of an example that she gave about Mendigo Hill earlier, where it took over 1,300 donors to contribute to a $6.8 million purchase of Mendigo Hill. It's incredible how we can come together over the years and make projects like this happen. This is truly a collective work, and it shows how much your support really matters. There's a few ways that you can get involved with this work. Being informed and sharing these issues with your community is definitely one of them. And some helpful tools to help to enable you to do that are on our website. So go to openspacetrust.org/blog, or you can go to openspacetrust.org/events.
Great. I want to reiterate what you just said, Angela, that it's been this incredible community effort for 40 plus years now of thousands of people coming together to enable this work. So every single thing that was shared today is completely thanks to the people who have been contributing towards this work, the donor community that has been supporting Post along the way. And then also the other advocacy and and involved citizenship that people have been doing in regards to policy and various issues. But we really want to thank our donors today. And if you are not already a donor and you're feeling inspired, we encourage you to donate and become a member of our donor community. There's another great way to support us, which is volunteering. So if you'd like to volunteer, check out our volunteer page. And there's some great opportunities to support us in that way as well. But in general, like Angela said, being an informed community member is a great start, you know, and we appreciate being in this work with all of you. And I don't know what else to say. That's pretty much it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. Thanks for doing this with me. See you all later.
Bye.
Bye.